Welcome here to First Unitarian Church's Pau Hana here on Tuesday nights. We had a few weeks off while I was away and on study leave and such, but it's good to be back. A few people let me know they'd made other plans this evening, and others who said they'd be here are logging in as we speak. So we'll see what happens. It's sort of a small but mighty crew this evening.
Something happened to your upper lip.
Yeah, on a dare, a friend of mine said I should grow the mustache out and shave the beard. So I haven't really decided if it's going to last a whole lot longer. We'll see what happens by Sunday. So, yeah, I've even been watching YouTube videos on how to train a mustache, and I'm not sure if I'm really needing to get into the whole owning a hair dryer and getting mustache wax, and I think it probably
have
won't.
A nice handlebar,
Well, I saw the ads for Murder on the Nile with Kenneth Branagh, and I immediately had to give this a try. I mean,
You need a straw boater hat.
I'm confident his mustache will be nominated for Best Supporting Performance next year. So it's got, if you haven't seen it, it's got like 2 layers, Kenneth Branagh's, and I'm worried it's not even real, that it was just makeup, and then I'll feel bad. But anyway, we'll see what happens with the mustache. This Pau Hana is only about my mustache, so I hope you didn't come with any other questions. My mother certainly had a lot of questions about the mustache. But yeah, this is
too, I bet.
Yeah, this is our time to as I said, I had actually tried to get, and I still may. I've been punching a little above my weight class maybe, and I tried to get Carl Rhodes on tonight, but didn't work out, and so I'm gonna try again for next week, and we'll see. But it's a busy time for him, as he is the church's senator, state senator. I thought it would be good. So we'll see what happens. But for tonight, I thought I was away on leave. I can answer all kinds of questions about what I got up to, what I've been reading, what I've been watching, if you're curious, or any other questions concerning the church or life in general. I had a few emailed to me so that folks didn't have to ask them publicly. So I'll ask those as we get to it. But did anyone come here with anything burning on their mind? Anything they really needed to know from Reverend TJ? I saw Janice's hand. Go ahead, Janice.
I have a list.
All right, let's do one off the list, and we'll see.
I know exactly. If nobody else has something to say, then I'll fill in. I want to know your system for preparing a sermon.
Okay, so so the question is, what's my system for preparing a sermon? So I have a document that I work on, just me, that's TJ's worship preparation, and it has the date and all the different music, and as I start to fill in what's going to be happening that Sunday with Dennis, I often have a title already and maybe a reading or an idea or a book that is informing it, or a movie often, or a song. There's something that's tied up in it, so it's kind of percolating for a little while, so that's one tool. The other is that we have these monthly themes. So sometimes when I know a monthly theme is coming up a few months down the road, when I run across something that I'm reading, I mark it for a few months down the road instead of that. So I'm always, the worship themes help me and the worship team a lot as we're going through things, and so that's another tool I use. So those are the sort of foundational things that are going on from the tool planning. As far as the planning goes, it really it changes. So Fred Craddock is a preaching professor at Emory, and he says if if you know pretty much what you're gonna say, you know, use note cards. If you've got to say something really important that you want to be sure people understand, use an outline. And if you're gonna say something that might get you fired, use a manuscript. So that you can produce it to someone afterwards. And so I move in those along that. I for a long time I was just a manuscript preacher just because it was fun. Of late, I've done a little bit more working from an outline or from notes, and then I often write at least the ending, like so that I know exactly what I'm going to say at the end. And so that's sort of functionally how I prepare, like along those lines. But and then a lot of it is also just being really careful about the music, and not so much that I'm choosing necessarily the right music, but that I'm being sensitive to what music is happening before and after the sermon. As you might notice with my sermons, the two often bookend and flow into one another. So that's sort of the short answer. Is this a follow-up, Richard?
In addition to that, have you had to write a manuscript for any of your sermons since you've been here?
I have written a manuscript for the vast majority of sermons since I've been here, but I was still operating in the I'm just so used to writing this manuscript mode, like the writer mode and mentality. Around the beginning of this year, so this church year, I started doing a little bit less off the manuscript and preaching more from just sort of thoughts and an outline and things like that. The funny thing about that is when you don't preach from a manuscript, you actually have to practice more in a sense. You know what I mean? You have to actually really be sure you know where you're going during the sermon. Like notes won't really help you because once you get going, you sort of get lost a little bit in the emotion of it. And if you're not really sure emotionally what direction you have to go, so even though there's less writing involved, then it's a similar amount of time because there's more sort of speaking out loud preparation and working through arguments and working through thoughts. So yeah, it's kind of a trade-off, and I go back and forth. And then of course there's the musical sermon that I did, which is a very different kind of preparation. But yeah, those are, yes, thanks to Laurel, my producer. But yeah, that's a little bit of how the preparation happens. And then of course, keeping my eye on whatever's happening in the news or around us and in our community. There's a lot that goes into it. So, yeah. And a lot of times when I do manuscripts, there'd be things I delete. And Mike and Nancy Young used to always say, I wish you would just keep everything you delete. And then at the end of the year, just do a random sermon of all the things you took out of your other sermons. And I guess that would have been a nice thing to have. But there's like, sometimes there's just one too many stories, or like one argument just went a little crazy, you know, and started to make me sound kind of nuts. So yeah, but that's now the end of that answer. I've definitely talked about it enough.
Great. Thank you. You answered everything I wanted to know.
Okay, good. Any other questions on people's minds?
You want number 2? Or answer one of the ones that you wrote in.
Sure. No, we have a write-in one, but it's a little on the heavier side. So why don't we take yours?
This is an easy one. I want to know what ministers talk about when they get together.
Easy one.
What the question is, what do ministers talk about when they get together? A lot of times, so it's a mix. There's hey, can I talk to you about something at church get together, where we give each other like sort of like a take on something going on. So that's more of like the professional thing. But I think what you're asking is like socially, what do we talk about? And a lot of times it's, you know, family stuff, because they can't really talk about it with their families, and I don't know, I'm just thinking about conversations I've had, lately with ministers. Yeah, family stuff. We actually, it's kind of like we take the opportunity to talk about things that aren't church related, because it's almost that there's this baseline understanding that you've got of what that other person goes through day to day. And there's just the kind of joy about being with someone who gets that. And I don't have to explain that to them. And so there's kind of an openness to talking about, family, and actually maybe more vulnerable things that I might talk about even with some friends, just about like fears, or, the kinds of fears that normal people wouldn't really understand because they're related to work or something like that. So I guess we talk about that some. We tell lots of religious jokes, so that's kind of boring, I'm sure. And we make fun of each other's religions a lot. And so tell lots of like different kind of Protestant jokes and things like that. So that's a lot of what. So yeah, I see that. Does that answer your question? I mean, I know it's kind of general. Yeah. So all right, I see that Richard has his hand up. Richard. Or Karen, I'm not sure who. You're muted though.
Yeah, that raised a question in my mind. When the notion of seeking supervision. When I was working in professionally, and I got into a situation with a patient that was considering an approach that was non-standard, or feeling over my head. I had a group of people that I would turn to for supervision. Are there similar systems in place in the ministry? And is that pretty much self-monitored?
So it's a mix. So in the UUA, I can only really speak to the Unitarian Universalist Association. So I realize what I've done is I have not pinned my video first. So you're not just looking at me, you're looking at other people. And I'm just out of practice. So Kimberly, I can solve this problem by doing this. And then everyone is seeing me no matter what noise anyone makes.
Thanks, TJ.
No problem. So in the UU world, this is how it works. As you're going through the beginning of ministry, you have someone you're kind of checking in with about stuff. But once you become a minister in formation, meaning like you've been ordained or you've got a church, you have to have a someone observing you. You have to have a mentor, is what it's called. And that person reviews you have to be reviewed 3 times to get full fellowship. And that person reviews your church's review of you, your own personal review of yourself, and all those other things. And then also talks to you every month. You have to meet with them every month. And so then they write their own estimation that the Ministerial Fellowship Committee reviews. So essentially for the first 5 years of your ministry, you have a monthly meeting with someone who also is reading all of your reviews. And you talk to about all of those things. And any kind of concern is either raised by the congregation, raised by that person, or raised in some other way. And then the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, essentially, they have to reaffirm you every year for 3 times in your first 5 years of ministry, more or less. And so that's how that observation happens. And that's sort of a professional observation. I also have a spiritual director, and I also have, other kinds of help and other resources that I work with. Those are optional for people. The only real required one from the UU perspective is the mentor who's there in the process of the ordination, of the formation, who you sort of get after you're ordained. So that's how that works. But the Ministerial Fellowship Committee is always watching. no matter what happens, I now have, I never really announced it because it's just kind of the way it is, but in November, I was granted full fellowship. So I'm now, you know, we can train interns, we can do whatever. Yeah, I don't have to do those reviews anymore. So my mentor is lovely and is still my mentor. He didn't fire me because because I got full fellowship. And so, yeah, so that's actually been part of the process I've been going through. So yeah, does that, I hope that answers your question. So great. Any other questions?
What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Thanks, Kimberly. Well, I watch TV just like everyone else. I read. I go in the water as much as I can, especially if someone else is driving. I sort of have this rule. Basically, like, I'll be honest, if anyone else is driving, I'll do whatever they want to do. I have, like, if someone comes and picks me up, whatever it is they want to do, I'm game. If it's a movie, if it's, I go to movies. I mean, what do I like super enjoy? Like, I mean, for me, my favorite thing is going to the baseball game right next door to the college baseball. I think about it all off season. I get excited when it's happening. I think live sports is just one of the great things we have in the world. And so that's like one of my top things, I'd say. Going to movies is probably the other one. If I like a movie, I have a weird tendency to see it multiple times in the theater. I saw Dune 3 times in the theater because it was excellent. I saw West Side Story twice. Yeah, anyway, so that's sort of it. And then I mean, do I enjoy running? I run and I get a lot out of it, but I'm not like a weirdo runner who is like, that's all I talk about and what I do. I just enjoy it. So I think that probably covers it. So, but I read a lot last year too. So yeah. Any other questions? Well, I do have a written question that might spark some others. I'm going to do something very unministerial and respond to a text message because it's something that's time sensitive. It's the in the, okay, cool. And then I'm going to say at work. Stop texting. Okay. All right. So the question I received was this. Will you please address some of the ideas that John McWhorter raises in Woke Racism, How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America? So I don't know, can anyone indicate whether you're familiar with this book by John McWhorter? Okay.
No.
All right. I'm okay. Great. So some people have read it. Some people have heard of it. Let me say a word about Professor McWhorter first. I know Professor McWhorter. I edited one of his books before I was a lawyer. I worked in publishing, and he wrote a book called The Power of Babel. He's a linguist at Columbia. He was a linguist at another school when he was an author of ours when I worked in publishing, but he was always concerned. So his book, The Power of Babel, addressed a lot of pidgin languages, addressed a lot of recorded ways that linguistic formations happened in oppressed people. Like, he is an extremely bright scholar. And of late, he has become sort of a darling of people who are opposed to or fed up with or don't understand or just don't like the ideas of anti-racism and white supremacy culture. So he so he is sort of he's a professor of color. He's a man of color at a distinguished university who is sort of taking the side of the idea of anti-racism or combating white supremacy has taken on, he calls it a religion. He examines it and says it's taken on a sort of a religiosity. It even has elements of, sort of like original sin being white privilege, and he equates all these things and sort of sets it up like a religion and says that there are elements of, not wholesale, but there are certain elements of that movement that are fundamentalist or ideological, and will essentially use the tools of calling someone a racist to make someone lose their job, make someone do this, and have this sort of what he calls this woke culture. So it's a critique of the woke culture, is this book. And I can't say I've read all of it. It's not a long book. It's 6 chapters, and I've gotten through about half of it. The thing is, I mean, the question, let me just go back to it, is, will you address the ideas that he raises? Okay, so the primary ideas are this, that some people have taken the idea of anti-racism so far that they are using it in some ways to destroy the lives of people who either didn't know better or were meaning well or things like that. I'm getting a question, the definition of woke. That's a really good question. Woke was the word of the year from Merriam-Webster like 5 or 6 years ago. It's a word that came out of Black Twitter and Black culture that was sort of explaining when someone in that culture is aware of what's going on, that they've sort of turned from Plato's cave and is seeing reality and no longer looking at the shadows. But then it was kind of adopted by white people, and with some criticism that like a white person calling themselves woke is the definition of not being woke. And maybe that's explaining a little bit about what woke means. So it's something someone else has to call you, or something. Well, weirdly, it's also something people are extolled to become. You should become woke. Yes, it's like the red pill from the Matrix. So they'll tell you should get woke, but then if you say you're woke, you're not woke. So this is language. This is the kind of thing that McWhorter revels in because he's a linguist. He's one of the best linguists in the country. And so he talks about this woke culture, which is also part of this anti-racism. And, these are questions that have been raised to me privately at church and by people because they're afraid to kind of ask these questions in a wider church discussion. Just so you know, like there's people who have just kind of stepped back from church stuff and some of the anti-racist work because they feel like there are shades of that kind of shouting downness, that if someone says the wrong thing or something like that, that they're going to be ostracized, they're going to be cast out. Again, like a religion, like that they'd be seen as a heretic, that they're not getting on board with the religion. And so it's got some resonance here, especially with people who haven't really been following Unitarian Universalism and what it went through. So here's the thing about McWhorter's book. He talks specifically about Todd Elkoff, the minister in Spokane who was unfellowshipped for writing a book called the Gadfly Papers, which sort of talked about the same idea of accusing the Unitarian Universalism of becoming the woke police, essentially, and that if a minister didn't fall in line with the beliefs of anti-racism and all this kind of stuff, that they could lose their jobs and lose their privileges and all this kind of stuff. So he actually addresses Unitarian Universalism in the book. So it's kind of interesting. He also calls Ta-Nehisi Coates, Robin DiAngelo, and Ibrahim Kendi sort of the trinity of woke culture, which are all 3 books that our church has done a lot of reading of. So it's kind of interesting to read. Yes, Martina, like cancel culture. Yeah, it's interesting to read a book that is so timely and kind of talking about stuff that we've been talking about. But my estimation of it is really that there's two. I have two opinions. Like I said, I worked with Professor McWhorter. He is an author and he wants to sell books. And I get his arguments. I see his arguments. But he's an author that wants to sell books, and he's got a great market. If you're a man of color at an Ivy League university writing about these subjects, he really is one of the only men of color writing about these things. He has a very unique voice. And the thing is, I think he uses language beautifully. And when you read it, it could seem like he's being mean or kind of inflammatory. And I know a lot of people will like that language, but if you read the whole thing, he kind of makes some very rational arguments toward the end of the book about what he thinks would actually make a big difference in improving the lives of people of color in America. And they're specifically about decriminalizing drugs. He makes the argument, go figure, he's a linguist, of teaching reading properly to every single student in the United States. And then I forget what the third one is, but they're not the kinds of things that you hear coming. Oh yeah, getting rid of the idea of four-year college, that everyone has to do that. Like start to get to develop more of a trade culture and things like that. So he does make his own arguments in the book, and he kind of takes the foot off the rhetorical gas. So my thoughts of the book are, he's a guy selling books, so he's gonna make arguments in ways that are dramatic, and he does. Some of the writing is really, I mean, the writing's great. The arguments aren't, I don't really think, always carry the day. He kind of does the things he accuses other people of. He makes kind of sort of blanket statements a few places, whereas a lawyer, I would be like, where's the support? I don't understand. One thing that's interesting is he does really encourage people to get more into the empirical truth of what they are espousing, to try to find the statistics, to try to really understand what is going on underneath some of the sort of mantras that folks are adopting. But in the end, make some pretty practical arguments. And then in the final chapter, he actually does say he's not talking, he's really trying to talk to the people who have some reason left, who look at things critically and think about what really makes a difference in the world. And he's literally saying, don't bother talking to people who are so ideologically fixed in one way of thinking, that he basically is like, don't waste your energy on them, because it's like trying to convert a religious zealot. It's just never going to happen. And so he kind of makes the practical argument that we sometimes make as Unitarian Universalists, which is like, whatever works, like however we can find commonality or community, we can. So that's my take on the book. Granted, I skimmed a little bit chapters 4 and 5, but gave a good read of 1 to 5 and 6. I did sort of the grad school plus read. The grad school read is first and last, skim the middle. So I did a little bit stronger of a bookend and skimmed the middle. So if there's anything atrocious in chapters 4 and 5 that I missed, and I sounded too complimentary of Professor McWhorter, then I apologize. So I have another question I'll get to. I'm going to tell one Professor McWhorter story to give you an idea of the kind of person he was, even, 25 years ago. I think I graduated college when I was 21. I'm 43. So 22 years ago, I was on a call with Professor McWhorter and a bunch of other editors at Times Books. Well, what's now Times Books. At the time, it was like New York Times Books is now the publisher. It was Bedford Freeman and Worth, W.H. Freeman Publishing. And his last name is McWhorter. And one of the editors on the team was from Georgia. strong Southern Georgian accent, old Georgia. And we were in this pitch meeting or this like developmental meeting, and she kept saying like, oh, McWhorter, that's such a rare name. Do you know this person? If you haven't met this person, and he'd be like, nope. And we just keep on going. And then she'd bring it up again. Like, I think she might've been drinking, and it was a different time then. And finally on like the third question, he said, well, it was very common for Black people who were owned by a certain family when they left slavery to keep that family's name. So there's a good chance their friends you keep talking about owned some of my people back in the day. Boom, and just dropped that in the middle of the developmental meeting. And Georgia, her name was actually Georgia, was like, I mean, just red, not just from the booze. Like, I mean, it was, I'm gonna have to edit part of that story out, but yeah, that's how I met Professor McWhorter, telling that story. I worked with him later when I was working at the Riverside Church, and the preacher was doing something on the Tower of Babel, and so I got them in touch, and so it was nice to reconnect with him. But he's an amazing person, and wrote a book that is pretty argumentative. So anyway, someone sent me a question. What are your biggest joys in ministry? That's easy. Vacation. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, what are your, okay, so it's multiple. One, I think the first one that comes to mind still, I mean, I'm kind of a worship person, and like when a Sunday really comes together, that's a real joy. When I really feel like people have felt held and felt cared for in that time, and when the people participating in worship feel like they've done their part to be part of that. That's one. I think the next is when I see, like, some of my greatest joys are watching congregants teach one another, congregants help one another, like building a system where, just like in in chalice circles, in the microaggression workshop, in other ways, when a community starts to care for itself, creating this sort of like self-germination of care and concern. That's another real joy I see in ministry. It sounds, I don't mean it to sound macabre, but like, I think maybe honor is the better word, but having this role, being asked by friends and family and congregants to take part in memorials and to be there at the really hard times for people it's sad, but for me, that's part of why I got is part of the call, was to be there for people when they are the saddest or when they're going through things that are hard. And so taking part in that for folks. And I've done vastly more memorials than weddings. I like weddings. They're fine. It's not really something that because I'm annoying to have to do a wedding with. I require anyone I do weddings with to meet with me numerous times. And like, I don't do just like, one-off weddings unless it's for like a real important reason. So I do a lot more memorials. So that's another one. So those are sort of the three that come to mind. I will say this year, when the Transgender Day of Remembrance Committee called me in the service, their minister, I felt like that I was really doing good work there. So yeah, so I'd say that's another joy. Yeah, I hope that covers it. So thanks for the question. Good. I have a question. Apples or oranges? Gosh, I probably eat them the same amount. So it's hard. I hate to say both, but in the end, if I only could have one for the rest of my life, probably apples, just because I don't have to peel them. So yeah, can get to them faster. So I see there's now voting going on in the chat. I like this. This is good. So I can't see all of your hands, but I am now open for any more questions. Oh, okay. What is your favorite book? I'm getting a question, a direct message. What is your favorite book? That's a tricky one. You know, it'd be easier to talk about maybe like my favorite book this year. I don't know. That's really tough. You know, I read this book that was recommended to me years ago called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. I read it a lot I actually listen to it a lot because his voice is very soothing and very calming. And it's all about finding consciousness and kind of waking up. And he says a lot of things that are really hard to hear and that I want to disagree with, but I know are kind of true. It's more of an exercise. He's really a clinical psychologist who's also a Jesuit, but lives in India and gets in trouble with the Catholic Church all the time because he preaches or he teaches about Buddhism and Hindu things, but he is, you know, ostensibly Jesuit. So I like writers who get in trouble, and he gets in trouble, or did during his life, a lot. So that's a book I read. And then actually I read a book a few times also, or I listened to it a few times. Nah, I wouldn't really count that as my favorite book, but I've probably read Awareness the most of any other book. So that's what I'm gonna put in there. So David is asking favorite color. Let me see. I have a lot of blue around my house, I think, and I wear a lot of blue, so you can see just the tones just behind me are pretty blue. So that's probably my favorite. So yes, I agree, Jamuna. Getting in trouble is okay. John Lewis would like us to make good trouble, so I think it's good.
I'm curious why David asked, what's your favorite color? Being an artist, you must have a great appreciation of color, David.
Basic question, baseline. Can you say anything about why blue above any other colors? Why
Yeah, sure.
Important?
Yeah, you know,
just that it's pleasing, or is there more?
No, there's probably two reasons. As a child, I was born in the Northeast, and I just remember some of my earliest memories are of playing in the snow and making snowmen after like the skies had cleared. So I remember being shocked as a child to see all the snow fall and then there'd be blue skies. And I remember hearing, and then I also skied a lot as a child, and sometimes there'd be clear skies. And I remember just seeing these blue skies as I'm skiing. And I don't know, there was something, I mean, I realize it's that the sky is blue, but it's really my association of those early kind of awe moments of the vastness and the kind of those really early memories of playing, under the blue skies. So I think that's probably it. It could also be because one of my most terrifying early childhood memories was being on top of a mountain in the Catskills and the Adirondacks. They have these things, I forget what they call them, but they're thunderstorms that come in out of nowhere. They're not predicted. They just kind of accumulate and smack you. And there was lightning literally hitting the lake where we were staying. You could see the lightning hitting, and it was so loud. It was ear piercing, ear splitting. And then in the next morning was totally clear and blue, and I felt safe again. So it's probably a sky thing. That's my guess. So,
well, and the safe thing.
Yeah, they're both around like a safety kind of thing. So you know, I really like the blue skies here. It's pretty, they're there pretty often. So
Thank you.
yeah, sure. And thanks for the follow-up, Kimberly. Okay, we have a secret question. I've observed a high level or title of narcissism among ministers, not necessarily in the pathological sense. Is a certain amount of healthy narcissism required to be a minister? Well, narcissism is defined, I think, as an unhealthy self-love, a self-love that compels one not to eat, not to sleep. You know, I'm thinking about the myth of Narcissus, but that I think is really what narcissism is, and I think it is a very common thing in leaders of many stripes, including ministers. I would say that what's more important, so narcissism I look at as sometimes more of a reptilian version of good self-esteem. Like narcissism and healthy self-esteem can actually kind of look the same in giving someone the engine or the sort of foundation they need to do something. The difference comes in a long-term view, that narcissism, if it is narcissism over time, will eventually conquer its holder. It will kill Narcissus. He will starve looking into the ocean or the water at himself. And I think self-esteem, I think sometimes healthy self-esteem gets called narcissism in our culture, but really loving oneself and caring for oneself, having that be part of the foundation that lets someone be a leader, is I think is more what healthy narcissism is. That being said, there can be times when someone who generally has good self-esteem might not be in a great place and starts exhibiting more narcissistic behaviors than healthy self-esteem behaviors. And there's people who are narcissistic who have a narcissistic maybe personality disorder, like diagnosed, but will have periods of maybe seeing themselves as being more having good self-esteem. And then finally, the final difference between the two is that in general, narcissists, they use loving words and loving actions to extract results from others, where someone with good self-esteem loves and cares for others and hopes the results work out. And I think that a healthy minister is of the latter variety. A healthy person is really of the latter variety. If anyone on here is a psychologist, and I realize it sounds like I might be splitting hairs, but I think that it's the hairs that we really only know where we're splitting them if you look at someone's career 20 years down the line, or 5, depending on what it is. I will say this, that your esteemed and my esteemed colleague and your one-time minister, Jennifer Kwong, is now the person in charge of ministerial credentialing, like making sure young ministers should be ministers. And I will say that he noted an alarming amount of narcissism diagnoses in the early applicant pool, but he, like his predecessor, has said many of them get weeded out along the way because they find ministry really isn't feeding what it is they want. So that's, in the UUA, they tend to catch them pretty early. We have to do a 2-day psychiatric evaluation to even progress to even be considered for ministry. So they usually get us then if we have narcissism. So yeah, that was a long answer. I'm pretty narcissistic. So, but yeah. So any other questions? And if you're wondering about the results of my psychiatric evaluation, I will tell you that I think I've mentioned this before in a sermon, that I tested slightly amoral, not immoral, amoral. And the psychiatrist literally said, but we get that a lot with Unitarian Universalists. I was like, all right. So the sort of moral relativism key. I answered a question that was, do you think, true or false, most people will take what they can get? I said true. And I think in some way that is what triggered the slightly amoral, me thinking people will just kind of they're just going to do whatever they're going to do. They're just going to take what they can get. I just moved from New York City, so I was still kind of in that in that mindset. So that was what rung the bell for my amorality. But anyway, yeah. Any other questions for your amoral minister this evening? I'm sure there's some that could have come up. Let's see.
I'd like to know who's on those ministerial committees that sit in judgment to your narcissism or amorality.
So this is the way it worked, Kay. Thank you for your care and defensiveness. It's always appreciated. The way it works is this. There's a committee of 10 people, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. Well, it actually ranges in numbers. It's changed a little bit. There's actually 2. So it's really 16 people that meet in separate 8-person groups. And on every committee, there is usually 2 ministers, someone from the UUA, sometimes like professors at the seminaries, past presidents just of just congregations, people who've seen ministers come and go over time, people that have just had experience with ministers in different ways. They receive the psychologist's report along with all that. You write a book about yourself, basically, like to be a minister. There's like 150 pages you put together and you give them. It's called your packet that has all the stuff you've done, your resume, your go on and on. Every single bit of schooling you've ever done, essays, reading lists, all kinds of stuff. And just one of the things in there is the psychological evaluation. And if something is really problematic in the evaluation, someone will meet with you in the UUA first to talk about it. And you get a chance to work on it. If it's something that you can be looked at and helped with, there's even a fund for young ministers to get psychological care and counseling who need it. And so like for seminarians, specifically for seminarians. And so UUA does a lot to address the things that are there. It's when people see something and absolutely deny that it's there or refuse to even have an engaged conversation about it, that at that point, UUA staff might say, maybe take a year off and think about this and then come back into the formation process. That's rare, I should say. It's rare, but it does happen,
Are these committees self-selecting, or are they appointed, or are they?
Yeah, the MFC
voted?
It's not voted. It's an application process, I think, and there are 2 ministers of congregation of sort of ministerial life. They're co-leaders, Sarah Lambert and Reverend York, and I think they help guide that process along with the credentialing person who's now Jennifer Kwong. So there's at least 3 people who are in the UUA who look at the people who've applied to be on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, and make the decisions about who's going to be on there. So I think that's pretty much how. And then you have to have recommendations and all that kind of stuff. It's like applying for a job that you don't get paid for. So
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. It's considered a pretty high honor. One of the highest levels of sort of volunteering service you can do other than being on the board of the UUA. So any other questions. One person said that I'm brave to set up this Q&A, which is very kind of you. Thank you. Anything else coming to mind for people? And we've talked about me, and we've talked about Unitarian Universalism and stuff like that. If there's other stuff on people's minds, or just random things you want to know about my life or anything like that, now's the time. Okay, one question. Is there still a Crane Theological School? I honestly don't know. I know there's a Crane School of Music.
Crane was once affiliated with Tufts University.
Oh, yeah. The Divinity School closed in 1960 as the Tufts College Divinity School, and closed in 1968. So
Thank you.
yeah. Tufts was for a long time the only minister, or the only university that had a Unitarian Universalist chaplain as their main chaplain. So Tufts has a very long tradition of Universalism and Unitarian Universalism, and one of the highest percentages of Rhodes Scholars as well. Harvard and Tufts are two biggies. Someone so Laurel just wrote COVID in the question. No, I did not have COVID. I had a flu or food poisoning. No, I don't know if you're really asking what I had, but just wondering what's going on with it.
Yeah.
So as far as I know right now, the church has canceled the in-person portion of the fundraiser planned for February. And as far as I know, the board has kind of put on hold the plans that we're gathering, or that we're coming together for gathering. The board meets on the 26th of January, which is the meeting when we were going to discuss. Yes, Ellen says that we hope to just move it, not canceled. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said canceled, as is postponed for the time being. And on the 26th, I imagine that's one of the things we'll be discussing, or the board, excuse me, will be discussing. And yeah, we were working toward a kind of, together, me and the board working at some kind of reopening piece. And on the 26th, we'll probably discuss more about that. And I'm never anyone to make trouble or anything like that. But if people really have, one of the things we haven't heard that much about is just, I'm kind of curious how much people are feeling like, if I don't get back to church with the people, I'm just going to lose it, or like how it's hard for me to gauge how badly people want to really be back. I don't. And so, yeah, so I'm really not sure about that. So if people have strong feelings about being back and why, I'd love to hear them. You don't have to send them to the board. You can send them to me, or you can send them to the board. But, it's one thing we just haven't heard that much about from folks about what they really want to happen. I think it's good to have a lot of trust in the minister and the board to do that, but it is interesting just to not have the opinions of folks to kind of weigh, even if it's just a few sentences. If you're feeling like you've got an opinion about, hey, like maybe it's everything from, hey, if you're vaccinated and boosted, like, come on, like, let's all just go to church and we'll figure it out. Or if it's like, why the hell would everyone get together until we're at a certain level? Like, I'm kind of just curious anecdotally where people are. So if you feel like telling me in an email or something before the board meeting on the 26th, I'd be happy to read those and get a sense of how people are feeling. So yeah, from what I understand, people don't seem that from now, the sense I'm getting is until the numbers are down significantly, no one really wants to get into a closed space, with a bunch of other people. And that's what we're going on. And so, yeah, so that's how we're proceeding. But if there's something different than that, let me know. Let's see. The funny is I have a question about my mustache. for those of you who joined more recently, the first 3 minutes of this Pau Hana were really questions only about my mustache. I have not decided how I'm going to grow the mustache yet, or whether it's even going to make it to Sunday, whether I want it on permanent record, a sermon with the mustache or not. So that's where I am on that. Someone asked if I'm going to grow it as a like Salvador Dali or with a Fitzgerald twist. So we'll see. For those of you who weren't here, the part of the inspiration was the Kenneth Branagh mustache from the Murder on the Nile advertisements that I've been seeing. So can we vote now on mustache? Yeah, if you want to vote on keeping it or getting rid of it, feel free. I'd be curious. Perhaps that's more interesting than whether you want to get back together for worship or not. So so I'm getting some keep its. Oh yeah, that's true. The top of my t-shirt does kind of mimic the design of the that's very, very astute of you, Carolyn. So yeah, I see some thumbs up for the mustache. Well, we'll see if it makes it to Sunday. You know, that's the question. Because for most of the time around town, I'm wearing a mask, so no one really, knows. It's only in these few settings when I'm home and transmitting. So yeah. Well, good. Any quick ones? Any lightning rounds for me in the last few minutes? In case you're wondering, I got a food processor for Christmas, so I will be making a potato soup tonight, like a good Irish person. So, any others? No, that's it. All right. I guess you know what I'm having for dinner, so you know pretty much everything now. So, thanks everyone for this wonderful time of questions and answers. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning, I tell you, I was trying to get Carl Rhodes for today. I'm trying to get Carl or Takashi for next Tuesday. I will keep everyone informed. So have a wonderful time tonight. Have a great evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone on Sunday, if not before. All right. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Let's see.
Love.